A very good afternoon to you. This is a channel on communication, a subject that is offered to most of the programs across India and across most universities and programs. This is usually a low credit paper. However, its importance goes beyond the credit system and kind of stalks the student through the student life and into the professional life. So coming back to communication, as studied in communication studies in Europe and America, a fundamental question is types of communication. So I have written here, what are the types of communication? In order to answer this question, we must first realize that communication is essentially a bipolar process. By bipolar, we mean that at every instance of any communication, we require two or more people or two or more entities to be interacting with each other. This is X, this is Y, the two entities who are interacting with each other. Who is this X and who is this Y? X is the sender and Y is the receiver. Now sender X becomes a sender and Y becomes a receiver because X initiates the process of communication with the initial message and Y is the first recipient of this initial message that X sends out. Now in this process of interaction, we have traditionally the four basic skills or four basic types of communication. What are these four basic types and skills? They used to be reading and writing, listening and speaking. Now if you really look at this, these are the 1, 2, 3, 4 basic skills or types of communication, which is very fundamental, and this is how any X at any point of time across the globe will be sending a message across. So basically, when we read and write, when we listen to somebody, and when we are primarily speaking, what are we using? We are using language. And here, language would mean language as we know it. How do we know it? How do we know languages today? We know languages as, say, Bengali. The language I'm speaking now, English. We would like to know French. Then in India, Punjabi, Odia, and so on and so forth. So this is language in the modern sense. So when we are reading in any of these languages or the dialects thereof. When we are writing, we are using any of these languages or the dialects. When we listen to somebody really and somebody speaks in any of the modern languages spoken across our country or across the globe, and we listen to the language. Now here, if you go back to the initial diagram of X and Y in the bipolar process of communication, we realize that the sender X who has the initial message, it could be anything. Let's say I want a glass of water. So sender X wants a glass of water and he either writes it, he either speaks it out in any of these language and the message, I want a glass of water, either spoken or written, is received by the receiver Y, who reads it or listens to it. Now this process of reading, listening and speaking and understanding a language, basically in the play of languages, what is the basic unit of a language? Naturally, this is words. So, any communication that uses words, so X uses words to communicate to Y, and Y has to receive it. Now, this word, supposing X uses a French word and Y does not understand the French. So will Y understand? Y will not understand. Hence, the word will lose its value and become meaningless. So, communication which uses language and is basically using the fundamental units of words should use meaningful words, and meaningful would mean they are meaningful to both X and Y. That means X and Y should share a common language. Language as we know it. So this common language will make the words meaningful. So any communication which uses meaningful words between the sender and receiver then becomes the first type of communication, that is verbal communication. Right? So verbal here would be the use of words, as in speaking and writing. So verbal communication is our first type of communication which uses meaningful words. That means words that are understood by both the sender and the receiver. And who's the sender? Sender is the communicator who first initiates the process of communication by sending the first or initiating message. And the receiver who receives this message naturally becomes the receiver of this communication. So in types of communication, what we now see is that the first type of communication is verbal communication. So naturally, if verbal communication is the first communication, what is the second communication? Quite naturally, very related to verbal is our non-verbal communication. So, what is non-verbal communication? If verbal communication uses words, therefore non-verbal communication will not use words. Common sense? So if words are not used, what is used to connect X and Y? How will X tell Y that he or she is thirsty and needs a glass of water? Perhaps X could draw a glass of water and ask for help. like I'm trying to draw a finger and say, please help. And this is, or I think my finger, the hands didn't work out. So this glass of water is an image of the message, and it tries to replace the words. So non-verbal communication, which does not use word, would ideally use signs, symbols, gestures, expressions, etc. Right? So in this first episode, when we were talking about the types of communication, we've discussed that the first primary type of communication is verbal communication, which uses meaningful words that are understood by the sender and the receiver. And the corresponding type, the next type, is the non-verbal communication, which does not use words but instead uses signs, symbols, gestures and expressions. So that's it for now. Thank you. If you've liked this, please subscribe and like this channel. Thank you very much.